Tech by Tips.
Welcome to another Tech by Tips video. In today's video, we're going to continue this series on building a Trinity Core 10.2.7 server. And in this video, we're going to actually build that server, because in the previous one, we compiled all the binaries that we needed, and now we're ready to start working on that actual server. But first, there's a prerequisite that I'm going to cover before I delete the build machine that I created. That is, we have to extract the contents from the official Battle.net downloader. So you need to buy the game and download it into your computer so that you can have all the assets that are relevant to the game. In this case, like I mentioned, we are going to be building a 10.2.7 server. So for that, you need to have your World of Warcraft downloaded, and it has to be the version 10.2.7 specifically. So always, for the version that Trinity specifies that it works, you have to make sure that you have the client on that version. So the files have to be on that specific version. So in this case, we're good. We see that I have 10.2.7 and all the files in my computer should match what we need to extract. And there's two ways to get the files that we need for our server. One of them is extracting it, like I was talking about right now, from the game that you currently have. And there's also an option that, at least for 10.2.7, was still available. So the other option is, instead of you extracting it from your files, which is an intensive process that takes a lot of time to do, you can just, as of now, can go to the Arctium website, and they have the data that you need from the file for two specific branches of Trinity Core. They have the master one, which is what I'm going to use, and they have the 3.3.5, which is the Wrath of the Lich King, that it's like the most stable that everybody says. So in this case, you can just go into the master branch, and then here it says the version 10.2.7, and here's all the files that you're going to need. And as you can see, it's a lot of information. You have some zip files that are 2 for 1 gig, so those takes a lot of time to extract. So if you want to save the time and they're still on a version that you're trying to build, then you can come here and actually download it from here instead of doing the extraction. So I'm giving you that option here that you know, tc.arctium.io, and then look for the version that you want to download, and you can get all the files that you need instead of extracting, right? But I want to cover how you do the extraction anyway, because this is going to change. You never know if Arctium is still going to continue providing those files, so we're going to cover that real quickly. In here, this is the machine that I use to build the binaries, but in this case, what I'm going to do is I mounted the Warcraft game folder into my computer, and that is the folder located exactly where you install the game, where you have the World of Warcraft launcher exe. So in my case, it was in the C drive games, World of Warcraft, so that's what I mounted into the Linux machine. You need to know that you are in the right place. You'll see the data folder here and the World of Warcraft launcher here that lets you know that that's the right place. So I have that already mounted, and we can validate by going into the terminal here, and then I mounted that as a root, so we need to be root, and then we can go and say, let's go into the home of Trinity Core on the desktop, and there's a folder named WoW, and then let's see what it has. And as you can see, it has the data folder and it has the launcher, so we're mounting the right folder from the computer. Now, we previously extracted some files into this computer. So in the server directory, we said that we got these files here on the binaries directory that are map extractor, maps generator, vmap for assembler, vmap for extractor, right? And all of these 4 binaries here are tools that we use to extract that data from that data folder that we have in our game, that then we can put on the server and use. So for that, what we can do is we can create a folder in our desktop here, and let's name it data, for example. And once we have that data folder here, we are going to, in the end, drop all the information here. But we're going to be working within the folder where we have our Warcraft stuff. So what we do is we are going to, in our terminal, we're going to go into that folder, which is this one, the one that has all that data. And then what we're going to do is we're going to trigger the binaries that we built previously inside this folder, and that's going to create all the extra stuff that we need. So we can do the following. We can say that we want to trigger the Trinity Core server, desktop server binaries, and then we want the map extractor. So when we do that, this should trigger that utility that we compiled. And as you can see, it starts, it says it's the map and DBC extractor, and we compiled it for Ubuntu, so it should work without any problems. And as you can see, it's reading the stuff in our folder, user desktop wow data. That's the folder that I made reference to before. And as you can see, it says it's extracting the DBC folder and the DB2 files. So that's basically dumping all of the databases related to certain things that then the game needs, and then you'll see that it'll create several folders. It started with the cameras folder, and then the GT folder, and then it goes ahead and extracts the maps. So we will see that a bunch of different folders get created in that location. So fortunately, since I have that mounted to Windows while that is working, we can see that in action here. So you can see that we already have the GT folder, the DBC folder, the cameras folder, and a maps folder. And right now it's working on the maps, so it's extracting the different maps for the different sections of the game and dumping them in here, as you can see. And it's gonna do that for all the contents here. So this is gonna take a long time, so I'm just gonna pause it and come back when that is done. And the map extraction has completed. As we can see, we see a full list of all the different maps that were extracted from the game. Each option here is a different maps. And if we go all the way back, we can see it's a lot of maps that the game has. But it not only extracted the maps, it also extracted other stuff. So we look here, if we go into the folder, we see that we have the maps, but we also have other stuff. We have cameras that were extracted too. We have DBC files that were extracted too, GT files, and the maps. So we have to continue because there's a lot of stuff that we have to extract. So let's clear out of this. And now the next thing that I want to extract is the visual maps. So for that, I'm going to make another directory that is going to be called vmaps, so visual maps. So if we look here, I should have that there, perfect. And now we're going to run the vmap extractor instead of the map extractor, and that's going to be extracting those visual maps from the game, which is the next thing that we need to do. And this probably is going to take a lot of time too, so we just have to let it do its thing. There's a lot of data that it has to process, so we just have to be patient and let it work. This process can take a few hours, but in the end we should see something like this, like the extraction was completed. And then we can go ahead and continue with the next step, which is running the vmap for assembler instead of the extractor. And this will go with the buildings and vmaps because that's what we want to assemble here. So vmap for assembler, buildings, and vmaps. And this is another thing that might take some time, so be patient, let it work, and we'll be back when that is done. This process takes a long time, but in the end it populates the vmaps folder with all the files that we need, like we can see here. And now that we have the visual maps out, the next thing we would have to do is we have to also extract the movement maps. So for that, we're in the WoW folder, we have all of our folders except for that one. So let's do make directory maps, which is the movement maps, and then with that, now we can then execute the maps generator binary that we have in our directory. So we're going to go into the home, Trinity Core, desktop, server, binaries, and then we're going to run the maps generator, and that's going to do that for us. So let's start it, and it's going to take some time to do the generation of the movement maps, so we just leave it alone until it completes that. And now that we have extracted everything that we need, we should be able to see all those folders in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all those folders and I'm going to copy them to that folder that I created in the desktop. So all of this that you see here, I'm going to move it to a data folder that I put in the desktop. So into this folder here. And then I'm going to keep that to use it later when I'm building these servers. So for that, I'm just going to do a copy recursively, and then I can specify that I want the cameras, I want the DBC, I want the GT, the maps, the mmaps, and the vmaps folders. And then I'm going to put that into the home, Trinity Core, desktop, and then in here we have the data folder. So we're going to copy all of that. It's going to take a little bit of time, but then in the end, we should end up with this folder having everything that we just extracted from the game. And then once that is done, what we can do is we can compress this as a zip file and then bring it up to our computer to use it later when we're building the servers. That's how you extract all the data from the game for you to then use later when you're building the actual server. Alright, I need to make a quick errata here. So in the last video, I said that you could delete the folder that says Trinity Core, which is the repository that we downloaded from GitHub. But I learned the hard way that even though we compile and we have everything allegedly installed in the system, it makes references to things that exist within that repository folder. So you should not delete that Trinity Core folder. You should keep it for things to work properly, right? So in this video, I'm gonna set up the system in an Ubuntu server operating system. So to get to this point, I repeated the steps of compilation and installation of everything that we did before. So just wanted to highlight that and let you know before we continue. Alright, at this point we have an Ubuntu server in this case. So I followed all those steps again, but on an Ubuntu server, because I'm assuming that we're going to be using operating system that doesn't have an interface, so we maximize the use of our resources. And as we can see here in the Trinity Core home folder, we have the server and it has all the binaries that we need. And I've also mounted the folder from my Windows computer here, so that if I do a check on the host, I have the data folder that contains all the data that was extracted in the previous step, and the database dump is also there. So we're ready to start setting this up. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to go into the server folder and then the etc, which is where we have the configuration files. So we see the bnet and worldnet, but they're the distribution, they're not the actual file. So I'm going to rename those to be bnet but without the dist. It's going to be the configuration file, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing for the world server. So now we should have configuration files there. So that's a very important step. So let's go back now into the binaries. I want to make sure that it at least tries to run. Now that it should be able to see the configuration files. So let's do a bnet server. And yeah, it sort of tries to run, but the database is not configured yet, so that's why it errors out, and the world server again does it. So everything is good here. So now the next step in the configuration that I'm going to follow is the database was installed in this server directly, so we should have a MySQL instance running. But I need to make changes to that because I want to be able to manage that database from outside the server, and the server by default is configured to listen only internally in the machine for connections. So I need to make a change on that. So I'm going to go into the nano editor, and I'm going to open the file in the etc MySQL conf directory, and then MySQL daemon, and that's a configuration file for the daemon. And then there's something here that I want to make sure that I have, which is the bind address at 0000. That means that it's going to listen on all places that a connection can come from, not only locally to this machine. So that's important. If you have 127.0.0.1 or localhost or something like that, change it to this if you want to manage the database from outside, for example, your Windows computer. So that's the main change that I wanted to see here. So we can now X out of here because we're sure that that is set up properly. And then the MySQL instance should be running. So we should be able now to log in with the root to MySQL. So now we're in the MySQL console. We're logged in as the root. In this case, we need to create a database. We need to create a user, and we need to give it permissions, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and first create the user. So create user, and then it's gonna be Trinity Core at, and then localhost, because the connections to this database are gonna be on this machine. If you want to connect to a database that is not hosted in this machine, it's somewhere else, then you have to put, instead of localhost, you have to put this symbol, and then it allows connections from anywhere. But in my case, I'm just going to leave it at localhost, and then I'm going to say identified. That means that we're going to use a password, and my password for this case is going to be password. This is not going to be used. This is just for the video. But in your case, use a good password, long with complex characters in there. And then I'm going to say with max queries per hour. So how many queries it can perform per hour? I'm going to put 0, which means unlimited. And the amount of connections per hour is also going to be unlimited, so 0. And then max updates to the database tables per hour is also 0. So we're letting it do unlimited actions on the database. And then we execute this. Create user Trinity Core at localhost, identified by password with max queries per hour 0, max connections. That's the problem. It should be max connections. So create user Trinity Core at localhost, identified by password with max queries per hour 0, max connections per hour 0, max updates per hour 0. Let's see if now it works. Okay, I had tested with this machine before, and it looks like I ran all of the commands, so that's why I'm getting an error. But this is the command that you should run. So let's just ignore that and just put the other commands that you need to run. So the other command is you need to grant the permissions to use the database. So I'm going to say for all the tables to the user Trinity Core at localhost, and then that's going to allow that user to use the databases. So that was successful. And then once we have that, we have to create the databases. I already created it, I believe. So, and I forgot to delete them. So this will probably give me an error, but I'm going to put the command that you have to type. So the database name is auth, so authorization, and the default character set is going to be character set UTF-8. And I'm going to say that the collation is going to be UTF-8 general CI. And it gives me an error because it already exists, as we can see. But this is the commands that you have to run. So then the next one is going to be characters. So you run that and create the characters table. And then you do the same for the hotfixes table. And then you do the same for the world. But I already have them, so that's why I'm getting those errors. You should not get that error. And then the next thing that we have to do is give it permissions on those databases. So the command for that is grant all privileges on, and then we put the database name auth, and then we put like all the tables in that database. So that's why we put dot asterisk, and then we say to the user Trinity Core at localhost, and we say with grant option. So it's, in this case it didn't give me an error, But we have to do the same thing for all of the tables, the databases. So we have authorization, we have characters, and we also have the hotfixes, and we also have the world. So that is granting the user that we just created the permission to the databases, and creating the user and creating the databases. And now the last thing we need to put is flush privileges, so that the permissions that we just assigned get implemented, and then we can say exit, because now we're done with the database setup. So now the MySQL should be working, and I want to validate that by going into my terminal and putting ifconfig to get the IP of my machine. In this case is 10.0.0.19, and then I can go into MySQL Workbench, and using MySQL Workbench I'm going to have a connection for that 10.0.0.19, and then it's going to ask me for the password. The user is Trinity Core, and then we can see that we have a database, and we have the 4 databases that we created just now. So authorization, characters, hotfixes, and world. And as you can see, the tables are empty because we haven't done anything to populate those tables, but that's what we need. We need those 4 databases and being able to see them using the user Trinity Core and the password in my case. So that tells us that everything is working good on that end, and we should be able to continue with the next step in the process, which is actually setting up the system. So we already extracted the information from the game that we have downloaded and bought from Blizzard. So we already have that data, and that data I'm connecting my virtual machine to my Windows computer, so I see that in the host folder. Here we go. You see that data. So that data folder has all of that, cameras, DBC, etc. So we need to move this data folder into the server folder where we have our executables. So for that, I'm going to say sudo, because to access this, since I'm mounting it from my computer, I need to be root. And then I'm going to say copy recursively, and then we're going to say copy the host directory and then the folder data into the home Trinity Core server, and that's going to dump all that data into that folder named server in the home of the Trinity Core user. There's a lot of data. It's like 20 something gigs of information that was extracted from the game, so this might take some time. Just let it do its work and come back when that's done. Apologies, I was recording the result of the running the world server, but my screen recording died, so I don't have that part. But now when we run the world server executable, then it says that our database is up to date, and then it's using all our information from the data directory to apply the hotfixes and everything that it needs to load the world. So we just see something like this, and we just leave it working until it's done. And when we get to the point where we see this thing that says TC at the bottom, that means that the server has been loaded. It loaded all the paths and the maps and all the things that it needs, and it's ready now to serve our world. So now we are basically done with this part. We could actually Control C to exit out of the world server, and this part is done. Now this server is going to be accessible only on my local network, so I'm not going to expose it, but if you were to expose it, I'm going to explain to you what you need. The first thing you need to do is identify what's your IP address, your public IP address, and then you also need to know that there are certain ports that you have to forward from your router so that it can receive that communication from outside your local network. The ports are 1119 for the logging part, and then you have the 8081, which is the secondary part of the logging, which is when you get to the character screen. Basically all those 2 ports are related to the authorization server, and then you have 8085 and 8086, which are for the world, for you to actually get into the world and select your realm and all of that. So those are the ports that you have to forward. And another thing is, if you're gonna expose it publicly, then you're gonna need to get an SSL certificate. So that's something that you have to do somehow. Get a domain, do an HTTP ACME request or a DNS request to get the certificate, and then you need to put those certificates here in the server where we had the, you see you have PEM files there, bnet server key and cert. So those are the files that you have to replace with the certificate, which is the cert, and the key, which is the private key. You have to replace that for it to work. And yeah, once you have that, then that should be on the network side, the main thing that you have to do. Then another thing that you have to do is on the database, there is going to be an entry for your realm, and in that specific entry you have to specify the public IP in the database for it to be able to connect the people appropriately to the server. And you do that by going into the database and opening the authorization database tables, and then you go to this table that says realm list, and you right click, select row, and this is your realm right now. The name of it is Trinity, and it's currently set up to work locally, so it's pointing to 127.0.0.1, which is basically localhost, and it also points as the local address to that. So if you're gonna make it public, this has to be your public IP. If it's gonna be local, like in my case, I'm going to put the internal IP of my server there, so it's a local IP address, and I'm gonna apply that in here. And that's where you do that. If you want to change the name of a realm, you can do it here too. I'm going to leave it as Trinity, but you can change the name of that, so how it shows in the realm list, it's the name that you specify in here. Now let's go back to the virtual machine, and in here there's another thing we need to do. We already configured the world server, but we need to make sure that things are correct in the configuration for the BattleNet server. So that's another thing that we're going to check. So in this case, we're going to go back into the server, then to the etc, which contains our configurations. And in here, we open the BattleNet server configuration. And then we're going to look for things here. So for example, we make sure that we have the 1119 as the first port that is available. And then here, the logging REST API is 8081, like I said. But then here we need to change the external address to what we put in the database. So for example, if it's exposed outside your network, that'll be your public IP. If not, it will be your local IP. And then for the local address, you leave it as it is because everything is running in this machine. And the bind IP is 0000, so that's perfect. And then if you had those certificates and key that I mentioned before, then here you would change it to point to the right file. So this would be the certificate file, and this one will be the private key file. And if you need a password for that private key file, you put it here. That is crucial, which is the login database information. So we need to make sure that this can connect to the database. So we say Trinity Core, and the password is password, and it's going to use the authorization database for the login information. So this is crucial here, and that's basically it. If I keep going down, there's other stuff that I'm not gonna cover in the video. You just read up on it in the documentation. That's like the main thing that you need. So Control X, Y to save, and now that is saved. And that means that we have configured the world server, and we have configured the BattleNet server too. So now we should be able to, let's switch to the other pane, and I'm gonna run the login server here. So bnet server, and as we can see here, it was working immediately. It connected to the database. It says database pool authentication opened successfully, and then it says that it registered the realm as Trinity, and it's listening on 10.0.0.19 8085. So this is perfect. We have no problems with the BattleNet server. And now if we do the WorldNet, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong folder here, so let's go into the binaries and then do the WorldNet server. Then it will start the world. This is usually a little bit slower than the bnet server, but as long as we get that message in the end with the TC expecting something, that lets us know that the world was loaded properly. So that's what we're waiting for right here. Okay, so now it's loading the spells and everything, the creatures. Everything's looking good here. And as we can see now, I have the TC prompt in here. So that lets me know that everything loaded properly and the world server is running. And now the next thing that we need to do is that we need to basically create an account. So in this case, in this prompt that says TC, we're going to put something like bnet account create, and then you're going to put an email address, right? So let's say something like test@email.com, and then we're going to put a password for this account. So in my case, I'm going to put password. So we're creating an account that it's going to be test@email.com, and then the password for that account is going to be password. When I do that, it says the account was created, and that's the first account in the server. So that's good. And then if you want to set this account as a game master or as an administrator, you can also do that. So you can do and say account set GM level, and then in here you would have to put the realm user ID, and that's usually something like the number of the realm and then number sign and then the number of the account. So since this is the first account, then it would be something like this. And then after that, we have to specify the level of permissions that we grant. So 3 is administrator, 2 is game master, and 1 is regular player. So if we want to make it an admin, we say 3. And then in here, if we put -1, it's going to give it this permission for all of the realms. So in this case, this account is going to be a total admin of the server. So if I do that, then that has been changed and now it's an administrator. And basically that's how you create an account, and the server is basically ready. Now we just have to connect to it. Now for us to be able to connect to the server, first we need to, what I recommend is that you create a copy of your World of Warcraft installation somewhere else so that you don't mess with the Blizzard version that you can connect to the official servers with. So then you make a copy of that, and then you come into the retail folder, and then you download the Arctium loader that is on the arctium.io website, and you drop it here. And then if you want to make it look nice, like have like a World of Warcraft icon that is a little different so you can recognize it, then you can just get an icon for that, and then make a shortcut of this executable. Then you go into that, and then you go into properties, and then you go into the change icon, and then look for that icon that you have, and then it's going to look like that. And now that we have this, we go into the WTF folder, and there's a config WTF file that we need to edit. And what we need to do here is we need to find an entry that says portal. This by default is going to say US, because that's what, at least for me, which I live in the US, that's what the official game uses to connect. But in my case, we're going to change this to the local IP of the server. So in this case, this is the IP of the server, and that's what we put here. So once you save that change, in my case, I already had it like that. So you see, so you exit out of there, it's saved. Now you should be able to go back here into the where you put the icon, and you can click this here, and then it's going to load the Arctium loader. If you get a message like this, it means that the Microsoft antivirus is blocking it, because obviously it's not signed by Blizzard or anybody. This is a program that was created by another developer, so you need to make security, like a firewall exception for this executable. So what you do is you go into your Windows antivirus, and then you see that it says, oh, I found a problem here. You say allow it, and then start the action, and now it shouldn't block the executable. So if you click here, then you see it says that it's gonna load. In my case, it says that there's an update, but I'm not going to update, so I just press any key, and it says, okay, connecting to the server, and boom. And then it'll start the game, and once the game starts, then you just have to connect here, and in this case, we said it was going to be test@email.com, and we said that the password was going to be password. And then you see it connects to the server, and then here's the realm that you can pick. And in this case, we say okay. In this case, I haven't updated the client, so the server is kind of ahead of what I had in my client folder. So in this case, you do have to get the update. And then once you do that, it's going to say that the server is compatible. And then instead of this, and it'll let you log into the server and play. But in my case, I haven't done it, so that's why it says that. But that's how you set it up. That's how you log in. And as you can see, the server's running and it's working fine. So if you want to set up a Trinity Core Warcraft server for 10.2.7, that's the way you do it. And that's going to be it for this video. So if you like it, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share the video with people that you think might find it useful. Remember, I'm not monetizing this channel, so if you want to support me to continue creating videos like this for you, feel free to donate using the links in the description below or using Bitcoin, and that's going to really help us a lot to continue focusing on the channel. And that's going to be it for this one. I'll see you in the next one.